In the heart of our cities and the quiet corners of our towns, addiction stands as one of the most profound and complex challenges of our age. Its reach is vast, stretching across demographics, breaking boundaries of age, race, income, and belief. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It's a silent epidemic, wrapping itself around the lives of millions, reshaping families, tearing communities apart, and silently challenging the very essence of what holds us together as a society. This crisis is no longer hidden in alleyways or behind closed doors. It's the nurse taking pills to cope with the stress of the job, the teenager ensnared by opioids, the corporate executive turning to alcohol to unwind, and the retired veteran who uses drugs to escape from the painful memories. Addiction has woven itself into the fabric of our daily lives, its presence leaving scars on communities, from broken homes and lost futures to overcrowded prisons and struggling healthcare systems. But perhaps the most insidious impact of addiction is the assault on the moral fabric of society. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our values, and systems we uphold. As people become entrapped in the cycle of addiction, the once clear line of right and wrong blur. Communities are left wrestling with compassion fatigue as overdoses and relapses continue to multiply. But what is addiction? Addiction has many guises, from addiction to substances like alcohol, nicotine, and recreational drugs, to gambling, gaming, food, pornography, social media, smartphones, and the list goes on. But there is much more to addiction than just chemical hooks that take root in our brains, causing us to lose control, become dependent, and finally hit the self-destruct button. In the 1970s, a groundbreaking experiment took place that would forever change how we understand addiction. Professor Bruce Alexander wanted to understand why people become addicted to drugs. He didn't believe that addiction was simply a result of the drugs themselves. Alexander suspected something deeper was at play, something more tied to the social conditions and environments we live in. Before Alexander's experiment, many studies focused on the effects of drugs on rats in small, isolated cages. In these experiments, the rats were given access to 2 water bottles, one filled with pure water and another laced with morphine or cocaine. The results were alarming. Most of the rats would drink from the drug-laced bottle obsessively, often to the point of overdosing and dying. The findings seemed clear. Drugs were inherently addictive, and anyone exposed to them would be trapped in a downward spiral of dependency. But Alexander noticed something strange about the setup of these experiments. The rats were alone, in small, barren cages, with nothing to do but press on levers or drink from bottles. They had no interaction, no exercise, no play, no purpose. Alexander wondered, what if the cage itself was the problem? What if addiction was less about chemical hooks in the drug and more about the emptiness and isolation the rats lived in? To explore this idea, he designed a new kind of habitat for his subjects, which he called Rat Park. It was spacious and lively, filled with colorful balls, tunnels, running wheels, and enough room for the rats to interact, mate, and establish social connections. In short, it was a paradise compared to the solitary metal cages of the previous studies. And just like before, the rats in Rat Park were offered 2 drinking options: pure water and drug-laced water. The results were astonishing. In this new enriched environment, the rats showed much less interest in the drug-laced water. They in fact preferred the plain water, only occasionally sampling the drug but never to the point of addiction or death. The rats in Rat Park were healthy, social, and active. It was a stark contrast to the isolated rats who drank obsessively and quickly became addicted, overdosing and dying. But this is a study about rats, I hear you say. Well, actually, there was a human experiment along the same lines. During the Vietnam War, about 20% of American troops stationed in Vietnam were using heroin on a regular basis. So much so that people back in America were panicking at the prospect of hundreds of thousands of junkies lining their streets when the war was finally over. But the study followed the soldiers home, and to their surprise it was found that the soldiers didn't go to rehab, nor into withdrawal. In fact, 95% of them simply stopped taking heroin after they got back home. Professor Alexander was vindicated. After all, if you're put into a horrific jungle environment in a foreign country where you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, then doing heroin is a great way to escape that nightmare. But if you go back home with friends and family, then it's the equivalent of being taken out of the rat cage and put into a human rat park. Alexander's experiments suggested a radical idea. Maybe addiction wasn't simply about the drug itself. Maybe it was more to do with the conditions of life and the sense of isolation or despair that leads us to, whether human or rats, to seek escape. In healthy, supportive and stimulating environments, the pull of addiction is weakened significantly. Addictive behavior is essentially driven by our desire to anesthetize ourselves from physical, emotional, and psychological pain. The rat park experiment shows that when people are cut off from society, placed in environments of isolation, and stripped of meaningful social connections or purpose, they are more vulnerable to addictive behavior. Alexander's work sheds light on the human side of addiction. It isn't just about willpower or weakness, but about the conditions we find ourselves in and how deeply we crave connection, stimulation, and above all, meaning. The cage-like conditions created by the unjust and corrupt rulers in this day and age has led many countless people to destructive addictions and tragically premature death. Yet into this cauldron of darkness and despair, God in His infinite mercy has sent another great light. This is the riser of the family of Muhammad, Abba as-Sadiq, from him is peace, the promised Mahdi, who ushers in an era of unparalleled prosperity, culminating in the establishment of the long-awaited divine just state. It is written in the Holy Quran, "Indeed, God will not change the condition of a people until they first change what is in themselves." Until we recognize that only God has the right to rule the earth through a man appointed by Him, we will never be able to change our condition of suffering. So let's give allegiance to God's true Caliph in this time, and through serving Him, find salvation from our destructive addictions.